one of the biggest questions you got is on inflation. What happens to an economy when you put $1,000 a month in everybody's hands? And so Ed asked this question. He said, what about inflation? For example, a landlord knows you're getting $1,000 a month more a month. He increases rent $1,000 a month. Or I think other things like part about the VAT too is like, will people increase their prices? Will big tech increase their prices? So I think those are two actually separate questions.
Yeah, they are.
Let's start about inflation, like landlord sticking to you on rent and everything going up.
Yeah. All right, so there are three core sources of inflation in American life that are making us unhappy. Number one is housing. Number two is education. Number three is healthcare. Maybe you could swap 2 and 3, but those are the big three. Those are the three that make us miserable.
Right.
Just about everything else in the consumer economy staying the same, even getting cheaper or better. So that's obviously media and entertainment, clothing, electronics, cars, food for the most part. Prices have been fairly stable. And this was even true post-bailout when we printed $4 trillion for the banks. There was not massive inflation. Now, so then why are housing, education, and healthcare getting so much more expensive?
Right.
It's because they're constrained in various destructive ways. So I'll go with education. Why is college 2.5 times more expensive than it was when I was growing up? It's because colleges have added new administrative layers and then just passed the cost on to parents. And then parents felt like they had no choice but to pay it. So then they turn to the government. The government says, here are the loans. And so now we're up to 1.6 trillion in school loans because there's just no competitive pressure on these colleges. They just keep on ratcheting up.
Right.
Healthcare, similar. Why do healthcare costs just keep going up and up to the sky? Because you have private insurance carriers. Their business model is like, I'm just going to charge you more this year. The employer feels they have no choice but to pay. They eat it. They make it up by not hiring people and turning everyone into temp gig and contractors.
Right.
So like we're paying a hidden cost there. And so there's a principal agent problem too, because if you're the consumer of healthcare, it's not like you're paying market rates. You can't shop around. So housing is the one that, what's his name? This question? That's fine.
Just pull it up. Ed, sorry.
Ed. So housing is the one that Ed's asking about, and housing is the one that people
I always ask about.
people home in on
Yeah.
the fastest.
It makes sense. If you told me I was going to get, everybody's going to get $1,000 a month, make the natural landlord be like, oh, sweet, like I can just jack up rent because people have more money.
So the first thing is that like no sane landlord would ever jack it up by like 1,000. Like you know what you would do is you might be like, man, I can get away with like a little more. I can get away with like a bump. Mm-hmm. So even now, it's not like the landlord's like, I'm going to charge you 100% of your income. Like that doesn't make sense. So even at the most extreme, a landlord would try and stick it to you for like some fraction of it. Let's call it like $300-$400 like on the upside. So then let's say they stick it to you to that tune, and you're getting $1,000 a month. You would do like anyone else would do, which is you'd be like, well, let's see what else is out there. That's one reason why all these other markets have remained relatively stable in prices, because it's very, very competitive. Now, housing's competition is getting constrained by the fact that you have essentially like NIMBY regulations that are keeping people from developing affordable housing, and you have limited housing stock available, particularly in robust economic areas that people feel like they need to live in to access certain jobs. So the first thing you do, Ed, is if they say, hey, I'm going to stick it to you, then you say, all right, what else is out there? And you would see if there are other reasonable landlords out there. And if you're another landlord, you'd be like, maybe I'll be reasonable, and then like I'll get a good tenant. But let's say there are no reasonable landlords. Let's say they all try and stick it to you. Then you'd look up and say, okay, I've got $1,000 a month. Maybe I can enlist like a friend of mine. Together we have like 2,000. Maybe there are a few family members. It's called 3,000.
Or a spouse, right? Yeah.
Or a spouse. And then maybe it makes more sense for us to find some fixer-upper someplace, split the house, and then try and get out from under the thumb of these landlords. And this $1,000 a month that we're all getting is portable. It's not contingent upon my living next to where we all work. It actually makes us much more mobile and dynamic and able to make better adjustments. This actually makes it harder to exploit us, not easier. It's not like the landlord's like, ooh, you got $1,000 a month, now I'm really gonna stick it to you. It's like, hey, I've got $1,000 a month. It's like, if you stick it to me too bad, like we can actually adjust and adapt. Yep. So So that's the short is that, like, are they going to try and stick it to you somewhat? Yes. Are you now more able to adjust and adapt and like respond and like not be exploited? Also yes. Are there specific issues around housing supply that we should try and help with, like create more incentives for affordable housing development? I am such a big fan of things like innovations in communal housing, and this could be like the guy in me, but I really like the smaller apartment footprints and like the like the urban stuff. Like I've been in one of the like a container
Turned into a house.
container turned into a house, like these micro housings. Maybe I there are probably other people that dig that stuff too, but we or even at like raising a family with Evelyn, like we look up and say, you know what would really help parents with young kids is if you were like in a place where you cook a meal once a week and then other people cook a meal once a week, and
Communal
like
living stuff,
like
yeah.
communal living stuff. Like we should 100% be investing in different ways to try and solve the housing problem. And right now, a lot of it is that the financial incentives all hew in one direction, which is I'm going to make the nicest apartments for yuppies that I possibly can, and because that's the way I can extract maximal financial returns.
Correct.
It's again a situation where, well, like, is this what we want? And if it's not what we want, then we need to create different types of development incentives.
Yep.
And in many cases, you'd hope to try and help communities address this, because many of the communities end up with local zoning regs that advantage the people with the most clout in those communities, which are never obviously the poor people in that community who are looking for affordable housing. Like it's always going to be like the affluent in a community who want to keep things quiet and the same and keep their property values high.
So that, I mean, that big part of Ed's question is like, won't landlords jack up the rent? If they did, it's still portable, right? Like that, that's a big takeaway.
It's still portable, and it's not related to your place of employment, which right now is one of the things that's keeping a lot of people stuck in place.
Right. And then on prices, right? Like what's preventing like Burger King from jacking up the cost of a burger?
Yeah, so one of the jokes I tell is like, if you went into your favorite restaurant after the freedom dividends passed, thank you, America, and the prices were 80% higher, it's not like you're cost insensitive. You'd be like, wait, this thing was like $10 yesterday, it's like $16 now? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then it just takes one restaurant that doesn't decide to gouge you for you to go there, and then all the other restaurants like, oh snap, I guess I can't raise my prices by 60%.
Right.
So you wind up with, in most marketplaces, like competitive pricing, and you saw this again where post bailout, when we printed $4 trillion, there was minimal inflation in consumer products.
Right.
If you look at it, and this is a very, very common misconception. So the three big causes of inflation right now are housing, education, and healthcare. Those are not being driven primarily by people having lots of money, particularly in housing, in healthcare and education.
Right.
They're being driven by market constraints.
Mm-hmm.
Like us having buying power, it does affect prices at the margins, but it doesn't, it's not the main driver in those three.
And you say a lot, the $4 trillion bailout didn't drive up prices.
Yeah, it didn't.
Yeah.
There's minimal inflation.
The bank bailout,
Yeah, and like what's happened in the education thing, it's like, it's not like everyone got rich, so like college got really expensive. It's just that, they just jacked up the prices and now we owe 1.6 trillion on it. So like the buying power is not driving some of the price spikes we're seeing.